You can't shift your way out of a legally binding contract, Alpha Silas. That's what our hero whispers as silver handcuffs hiss against his rival's skin. Welcome to a world where werewolves don't just train in martial arts and military tactics. They battle in the courtroom. Meet Thalassa. He's an alpha lawyer who lost his own pack lands through a legal gamble. Now, he's set his sights on the Northern Ridge, a territory owned by a Gamma Luna named Xanthe. She's at the bottom of the pack's top tier, intelligent but vulnerable. While most werewolves believe the moon goddess designates one fated mate for life, Thalassa has a much darker plan. Using a synthetic pheromone, he mimics the sacred scent of a mate bond, tricking Xanthe into a marriage designed to strip her of everything she owns. But Thalassa made one fatal mistake. He completely underestimated the power of the ranks he looked down upon. He never counted on Xanthe being pregnant. When a she-wolf is expecting, her chakra energy is channeled entirely to her child, making her immune to his mind games. And he certainly never expected a Lycan King, the Alexander the Great of Alphas, to arrive and enforce a justice that no law degree can ever override. Thalassa thought he could replace his Luna with a law degree, but now, Xanthe is coming for his client list, his school, and his crown. If you're ready for a story where the fine print is deadlier than a silver bullet, you're in the right place. Let's set the scene. The story opens in a council chamber. Thalassa says, "The High Council does not recognize a challenge of the fist when a signature has already settled the matter." He watches with cold detachment as guards cuff another alpha, Leander, with silver-lined restraints. Leander's wolf is a massive shadow fighting to break free, but the silver hisses, draining his strength. Thalassa doesn't even need to shift. While other alphas spend their days practicing combat, he spends his nights mastering the rigid, complex hierarchy of pack law. Leaning over the table, he whispers, "You were a great warrior, Leander, but warriors are relics. In this new age, the one who holds the pen rules the pack." Thalassa walks out, an alpha without a territory, but he's not about to go rogue. He pulls up a digital tablet and targets his next prize, the sun-drenched valley. It's a rich, expansive territory owned by a widowed Gamma Luna named Xanthe. She's smart, but she's drowning in a zoning lawsuit that the High Council deliberately staged to seize her land. She is the perfect pawn for his master plan. 3 days later, Thalassa is at a fundraiser in Xanthe's ballroom. He has applied a synthetic pheromone to his pulse points, a chemical forgery designed to trigger the sacred mate bond. When Xanthe's eyes meet his, she gasps, her hand flying to her heart. The ache of the bond hits her instantly, a deep, spiritual pull she believes is a gift from the moon goddess. Thalassa offers a practiced, sympathetic smile. He knows the goddess gives wolves a mate, but he's convinced he can improve on her selection with a little lab-grown chemistry. And I don't mean the lawsuit the council filed against your borders this morning. Xanthe is stunned, tears of relief in her eyes. "How did you know? My beta hasn't even sent the alert." Stepping into her personal space, letting the scent cloud her senses, he replies, "I am Alpha Thalassa. It is my business to protect those the law intends to bully." He doesn't use military force. He uses his intellect, tying the council's lawyers in knots. He convinces her that as a Gamma, she's a target for stronger alphas. The only way to protect her inheritance is through a matrimonial shield. Xanthe looks at him with absolute trust, believing the moon goddess has sent her a savior. To ensure they inherit the alpha title without a legal challenge, trusting him completely, Xanthe signs every single page. She doesn't realize she has just signed away the sun-drenched valley. He is building a pack of clerks, not warriors. Then, Xanthe announces she's pregnant. This is the moment Thalassa has been waiting for. He knows that a pregnant she-wolf finds it easier to reject a fated mate if the child isn't his, because her protective maternal energy shields her from manipulation. She's at her most vulnerable in the eyes of the law. Xanthe signs it with a smile, completely unaware that she has just signed her own eviction notice. The very next morning, she wakes up to find the pack house being stripped of its history. In the foyer, several Sigma wolves females born with defects that make them small and submissive are moving her belongings into crates. Thalassa stands by the grand entrance, his briefcase in hand, his eyes as cold as silver. "Thalassa, what is happening?" she asks, her voice trembling. "The marriage is dissolved, Xanthe," he says flatly. "I have filed a legal rejection. I am retaining the valley. According to the documents you signed, you have no standing here." But what Thalassa doesn't know is that Xanthe's pregnancy has made her immune to his influence. The love for her unborn child has awakened a strength she never knew she had. And the so-called weak Sigmas he brought in to replace her warriors? They aren't just submissive outcasts. They possess a unique gift, hypnotic voices that can sway the minds of others. They saw his cruelty, and their loyalty now lies with the wronged Luna. As Thalassa tries to consolidate his power, things start to unravel. His new Zeta guards, influenced by the Sigma's whispers, begin to question his orders. They turn against him, creating chaos within his carefully constructed legal fortress. But the biggest shock is yet to come. Xanthe, the Gamma Luna he discarded, is now leading the charge against him. With the support of the Sigmas, her loyal pack members, and the ultimate authority of the Lycan King, she's not just fighting for her land. She's coming for his law practice, his reputation, and the alpha title he stole. The trial of the century is about to begin, but it won't be held in a courtroom. It will be a battle of ancient power against modern corruption, and the wolf who was underestimated is now the one holding all the cards.
"But the baby. The child will be raised in my new institution," Thalassa interrupted. He looked out the window at the construction site on the edge of the property. "I am founding the Obsidian Bar, a dark law school where wolves will learn that a contract is more powerful than a bite." He signaled the Zeta guards to escort her to the border. Xanthe was now a rogue, a lone wolf cast out from the very land her family had held for generations. Thalassa watched her go, then turned to his beta. "Bring in the next group of Sigmas. Their hypnotic pheromones will be very useful in our upcoming litigation with the High Council." He walked into his new office, the valley now his. He didn't need to be the strongest warrior to rule. He just needed to be the one who controlled the ink. "Secure the perimeter with silver-laced fencing," Thalassa mind-linked his staff. "I want the school operational by the next lunar cycle." "You can't just rewrite the moon goddess's will with a fountain pen, Thalassa," Xanthe whispered, her voice cracking as the iron gates of her own estate slammed shut behind her. The Zeta guards, older wolves who had been chosen specifically for their submissive nature, wouldn't even meet her eyes. They stood like statues, their life experience making them valuable to Thalassa's new order, but their age holding back any spark of rebellion. Xanthe stumbled into the dark forest bordering the sun-drenched valley, her hands clutching her stomach. She felt the heavy weight of her pregnancy, her chakra energy and hormonal levels channeling mostly to the baby, leaving her too weak to shift or fight back against the legal rejection. Xanthe was now a rogue, a wolf without a pack, unprotected by any law and eligible to be killed by anyone who deemed her a threat. She wandered for hours until the scent of old campfire smoke led her to a hidden ravine. Figures emerged from the shadows, women with hollow eyes and the sharp, jagged sense of those who had been cast out. "Another one," a woman named Damaris said, stepping forward. She was a gamma, like Xanthe once was, the bottom end of a pack's uppermost level of dominance. "Let me guess. He gave you a scent that felt like a fated mate, but ended with a summons. Xanthe collapsed onto a log. He took the valley. He's building a school on the ridge. The obsidian bar, Damaris spat. He didn't just take your land, Xanthe. He's using your wealth to train a generation of betas and sigmas to do exactly what he did to us. He targets us because we have assets but no alpha-level military force. Xanthe looked around the camp. There were dozens of them. How many has he destroyed? Countless. An older Epsilon wolf added, her voice raspy. He uses his intellect to find loopholes in bloodline inheritance. He tells the High Council that since he is the Alpha, he is the only one capable of leading and training the warriors, making us legally redundant. He has my child, Xanthe said, her voice growing cold. He thinks because I'm a gamma I am smaller and weaker. He thinks the law is his shield. It is, Damaris replied, pulling out a stained piece of parchment, but even the tightest contract has a silver lining. We've been gathering evidence of his synthetic pheromones. If we can prove he forged the mate bond, the moon goddess's law states the entire marriage, and every signature you gave him is void. Xanthe stood up, her wolf stirring for the first time since the rejection. He thinks I'll hide like a sigma in a small space with my arms over my head. He's wrong. If he wants to fight with the law, I'll show him that a rogue has nothing left to lose but her chains. We need a Lycan, the Epsilon whispered. An Alpha King who can command other Alphas and see through Thalassa's legal illusions. Xanthe looked toward the distant peaks of the northern ridge. Then we find one. Because the only thing faster than a Sigma's bite is a mother with a vendetta. We move at dawn, Xanthe said, her eyes flashing a predatory gold. A law is only as strong as the fear of the one who enforces it, Thalassa said, looking out from his balcony at the rising stone walls of his dark law school. Beside him stood Alpha Cyprian, a Lycan whose presence felt like a physical weight in the room. Lycans were the kings of Alphas, possessing a superior status that allowed them to command even the strongest leaders. Cyprian was an elemental bonded wolf, specifically tied to the air, which made his movements fluid and his aura strangely calming to those around him. Unlike common wolves who relied on instinct, Cyprian retained every human memory while shifted, making him the perfect candidate for a high court judge in Thalassa's new regime. You want me to preside over a court that ignores the moon goddess's fated bonds, Cyprian said, his voice echoing with a low melodic resonance. I want you to preside over a court that values the written contract, Thalassa corrected, handing him a glass of vintage wine. The moon goddess gives us a mate, but she doesn't give us a property deed. We are simply filling the gap she left behind. Thalassa turned his attention back to the courtyard. Below, a group of Sigmas was being trained. These were female werewolves born with a defect that made them small and submissive. Normally, packs kicked them out to fend for themselves on the streets. However, Thalassa had realized their value. During their heat cycles, they secreted a hormone that caused a hypnotic effect, allowing them to influence the behavior of others. He was teaching them how to use that pheromone to soften opposing council members during negotiations. They are quite talented at talking their way out of threatening situations, Thalassa noted, watching a Sigma convince a Zeta guard to hand over his keys just by speaking. And if they fail, they run fast enough to vanish before anyone realizes what happened. And what of your wife? The gamma you cast out? Cyprian asked, his eyes narrowing. Thalassa laughed. Xanthe? She is a rogue now. Rogues are not protected by any laws. They can be killed easily without consequence. She is likely hiding in a hole somewhere, too weak from her pregnancy to even growl. He didn't know that at that very moment a young Sigma named Phoebe, one of his top students, was actually a plant. She was moving through the shadows of the library, her small frame allowing her to hide for hours in spaces most wolves couldn't fit into. Phoebe reached into a hidden compartment in her sleeve and pulled out a small vial of wolfsbane, a poisonous substance that could weaken even the strongest alpha. She wasn't there to kill Thalassa. She was there to steal the original forgeries of the mate bond scent. Outside, the perimeter was quiet, but Xanthe and her alliance of rogues were already at the fence. They were using silver-coated tools to bypass the lacing Thalassa had installed, knowing that while silver weakened wolves, some mutants were immune to its effects for short periods. Tell the students to prepare for the first mock trial tomorrow. Thalassa mind-linked his beta. We have a kingdom to build, and it starts with the fine print. Cyprian stepped closer to the edge of the balcony. The air is changing, Thalassa. There is a scent on the wind that doesn't belong to a submissive. It's just the smell of progress, Thalassa replied, completely unaware that his own law school was about to become his prison. If you get caught, you don't know me, and you certainly don't know the way to the rogue camp. Xanthe's voice echoed in Phoebe's mind link. Phoebe didn't answer. She was too busy pressing her small frame into the narrow gap between a massive stone pillar and the ventilation shaft of the obsidian bar. As a Sigma, she was naturally skilled at hiding for hours in small spaces when she felt threatened, and right now the scent of Alpha Thalassa's charcoal suit was getting closer. Below her, in the central archive, Thalassa walked with the Lycan judge, Cyprian. Phoebe watched as Thalassa used a biometric scanner to open a heavy silver-laced safe. Inside this vault lies the future of the pack hierarchy, Thalassa told the Lycan. The original merger agreements, the fated mate waivers, and the synthetic bond formulas. Phoebe waited until they left the room. She dropped from the ceiling with the grace of a wolf but the silence of a shadow. Sigmas were often dismissed as unintelligent or weak, but Phoebe was one of the few who had learned to use her hypnotic speech to her advantage. She didn't need the code to the safe. She needed the guard outside the door to think he had already checked it. She cracked the door just an inch and whispered to the Zeta guard. The Alpha wants you to go to the kitchen. He said there is a fresh kill waiting for the elders. The guard's eyes glazed over for a split second. The hypnotic pheromones in Phoebe's voice, heightened by her rising heat cycle, compelled him to nod and walk away without a word. Phoebe slipped into the vault. It smelled of ozone and ancient parchment. She found the sun-drenched valley file. Taped to the back was a small glass vial containing a shimmering blue liquid, the synthetic pheromone used to trick Xanthe's senses. Suddenly the room grew cold. The air pressure shifted. Phoebe froze. Lycans like Cyprian could project their emotions onto others, and right now, she felt a wave of icy suspicion washing over her. A clever little mouse, a voice boomed from the doorway. It wasn't Thalassa. It was Cyprian. He stood in the doorway, his eyes glowing with the intensity of an air-bonded elemental. Unlike the other wolves, he remembered everything Phoebe had done while shifted, and he had sensed her presence the moment she used her pheromones. I am not a mouse, Phoebe hissed, her heart hammering against her ribs. I am the evidence Thalassa forgot to shred. She didn't wait for him to move. She lunged, not with a claw, but with a hard bite to his forearm. A Sigma's bite was notoriously difficult for other werewolves to heal from, even for a Lycan. As Cyprian recoiled in surprise, Phoebe bolted. She ran with the supernatural speed of her rank, her human and wolf forms blurring as she sprinted through the stone corridors. Intruder in the archive. Thalassa's voice roared through the pack house mindlink. Seal the silver gates. No one leaves the ridge. Phoebe reached the outer wall just as the silver-laced fencing began to hum with electricity. She saw Xanthe waiting in the tree line, her eyes wide with terror. Jump, Phoebe! Xanthe screamed. Phoebe leaped, the vial of blue liquid clutched to her chest. She felt the sting of silver as she brushed the fence, but she rolled into the brush, disappearing into the dark forest before the Zeta guards could reach the perimeter. They have the formula, Thalassa whispered into the night, standing on his balcony as the rogue's scent faded. Kill them. Kill them all before they reach the High Council. If the silver doesn't stop them, the terrain will. Thalassa's voice boomed through the valley's public address system, echoing against the jagged cliffs. Xanthe pushed through the thick underbrush, her hand locked onto Phoebe's arm. Behind them, the sounds of the hunt intensified. Thalassa had deployed his specialized silver snipers, Zeta and Epsilon wolves who didn't quite make the cut for higher ranks, but were trained to use silver-tipped bolts to subdue targets. Because wolves hate silver and it weakens them, the air was thick with the metallic tang of the hunt. We have to reach the northern ridge, Xanthe panted, her voice strained. Her pregnancy made her movements heavy, as her chakra energy was mostly channeled to the baby and the father she once loved. The council's laws don't apply there if we can trigger an emergency hearing. A bolt hissed through the air, grazing a tree inches from Phoebe's head. The Sigma wolf let out a sharp cry. Unlike the larger alphas, Sigmas are small and weak, making them easy targets in a straight chase. I can't go faster. Phoebe cried, her legs trembling. My heat cycle. The pain is too much. Xanthe stopped abruptly and turned, her eyes glowing. She knew she was immune to silver due to a rare genetic mutation. While the silver-laced atmosphere made other wolves sluggish and sick, she felt only the fire of her own indignation. However, she knew she couldn't remain in her wolf form for long because of the mutation's toll on her body. Hide in that hollow log, Phoebe, Xanthe commanded, using her Luna authority. Use your scent to mask your presence. I'll lead them toward the ravine. Phoebe didn't argue. She scrambled into the small space, protecting her head with her arms as her instincts dictated. Xanthe stepped into the clearing as the first team of hunters arrived. They were led by a Zeta wolf who had served Thalassa for years. He leveled a crossbow at her. The Alpha wants the vial, Xanthe, the Zeta said, his voice cold. He says a rogue has no rights to property, especially property that belongs to the obsidian bar. Tell your master that the moon goddess doesn't recognize his bar. Xanthe spat. She lunged. Because she was a Gamma, the bottom end of the uppermost dominance level, she was faster and more skilled than the Zeta. She struck with a ferocity that surprised the hunters. She didn't use claws. She used a heavy silver branch she had found, swinging it with a strength born of desperation. One by one, the hunters fell back, confused by her immunity to the silver bolts they fired. But Xanthe could feel her strength fading. Her wolf was screaming to be let out, but the genetic mutation made the shift dangerous. Suddenly, a massive shadow fell over the clearing. The air pressure dropped and a chilling wind swept through the trees. Cyprian, the Lycan judge, descended from the rocks above. His emotional projection hit the clearing like a physical blow, filling the hunters with a sudden irrational fear. Enough, Cyprian commanded. His voice carried the weight of a Lycan, the king of alphas. Thalassa's hunters froze, their submissive instincts forcing them to bow to the superior rank. Cyprian walked toward Xanthe, his eyes scanning the silver bolts littering the ground. You are the one who bit me, he said, looking at the bandage on his arm where Phoebe had struck. A Sigma's bite is difficult even for a Lycan to heal. And you are the one who cannot be stopped by silver. I am the one he betrayed, Xanthe said, standing her ground despite the crushing weight of his presence. Cyprian looked toward the obsidian bar rising in the distance. Thalassa told me you were a meager omega, a slave to your instincts. He told me the law was his alone, but the air tells a different story. He reached out and took the vial of blue pheromones from her hand. Go to the High Council, Cyprian whispered. I will ensure the snipers find only shadows. But hurry. Thalassa is already drafting the warrants for your execution. Xanthe didn't wait to ask why he was helping. She whistled for Phoebe, and the two disappeared into the fog of the ravine. You are too late, Xanthe. In this hall I am no longer just a lawyer. I am the voice of the law itself, Thalassa said. He sat behind the elevated mahogany bench of the High Council, wearing the ceremonial robes of the chief prosecutor. Xanthe stood at the heavy oak doors of the courtroom, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Beside her, Phoebe trembled, her Sigma instinct screaming for her to find a small space and hide with her arms over her head. The courtroom was filled with the highest-ranking werewolves in the land, alphas who saw each member as family but followed the rigid, platonic hierarchy with absolute devotion. I have the evidence, Thalassa, Xanthe shouted, her voice echoing off the stone pillars. She held up the empty space where the vial should have been, then froze. Cyprian, the Lycan judge, stood by the window. He did not look at her. He had taken the vial in the forest, and now he stood silent. What evidence? Thalassa asked, a slow predatory smile spreading across his face. A rogue has no legal standing to present evidence. Rogues are not protected by any laws. By entering this sacred hall, you have committed treason against the bloodline inheritance that governs us all. Thalassa stood up, his gaze sweeping over the council members. This woman claims a mate bond was forged. But look at her. She is a rogue. She has been kicked out of her pack. She is carrying a child that her own biology is prioritizing over her logic. She is a threat to the military force we hold in such high regard. He's lying, Phoebe cried out, her voice carrying that strange, hypnotic lilt common to Sigmas in distress. He used us. He uses sigmas to influence the judges. The council murmured. Some of the older epsilons, wolves whose life experience made them valuable but whose age held them back, leaned forward with interest. Quiet, Sigma, Thalassa snapped. Your rank is known for being unintelligent and weak. Your bite may be hard to heal, but your word is worthless in a court of law. Thalassa turned to the guards, betas who served as his right-hand men. Handcuff them with silver. Let the metal remind them of their place in the hierarchy. As the guards approached with the silver-laced shackles, Xanthe felt the familiar sting of the metal in the air. While most wolves hate silver because it weakens them, she felt the heat of her genetic mutation rising. She couldn't remain in wolf form for long, but she didn't need to be a wolf to speak the truth. Wait, Cyprian said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. As a Lycan, the king of alphas, his command forced the betas to stop in their tracks. Cyprian walked to the center of the floor and pulled the vial from his robe. The air in this room is thick with deception, Thalassa. You told me the law was a shield, but I have human memories that span back further than your obsidian bar. He held the vial toward the council. This is a synthetic pheromone. It mimics the scent of the moon goddess's sacred bond. If the bond is fake, the marriage is fraud. And if the marriage is fraud, the sun-drenched valley still belongs to the Luna. Thalassa's face turned a sickly shade of gray. That is a Lycan's trick. You are projecting your emotions onto us. I am projecting the truth, Cyprian roared. The room exploded into chaos. Xanthe saw her opening. She didn't lunge for Thalassa. She lunged for the gavel on the bench. The trial isn't over, Thalassa, Xanthe screamed over the noise. It's just beginning. Order. There is no standing for a rogue in this chamber. Thalassa bellowed, slamming his fist onto the mahogany bench. He felt the sweat beading on his forehead as he looked at the High Council. These were alphas who held the military force in high regard. They were warriors who respected strength. Yet they were currently frozen by the emotional projection of a Lycan. Thalassa knew that while Lycans could influence those around them with their feelings, the rigid and platonic hierarchy of the pack was supposed to be absolute. The moon goddess gave us the mate bond as a sacred gift, Thalassa shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Xanthe. But this woman is a rogue. She has been cast out. She is a threat to our regular werewolf packs, and often serves as a villain in our histories. Will you take the word of an outcast over a licensed alpha who trains your sons? Xanthe stepped forward. She was a Gamaluna who had once overseen the hunts and aided the betas of the sun-drenched valley. Now she looked like a warrior born of the earth. I am not just a rogue, Xanthe said, her voice steady and clear. I am the mother of a future alpha. By the law of bloodline inheritance, my child belongs to the northern ridge. By stealing my land, Thalassa is stealing from his own blood. Thalassa laughed, a sharp, cold sound. You signed the merger, Xanthe. The legal rejection is final. There is no divorce in our world, only the law of the stronger mind. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the hall burst open. A group of Sigmas led by Phoebe marched in. They were female werewolves often born with defects that made them appear small or weak. Normally, these girls were kicked out of their packs young. But today, they were not hiding in small spaces with their arms over their heads. Look at them, Phoebe shouted, her hypnotic pheromones beginning to drift through the room. Thalassa didn't just reject his mate. He trafficked us into his school. He used our heat cycles to influence your decisions. The High Council began to murmur. Even the submissive Zetas and Thetas in the back of the room, older wolves who usually scouted and educated the pups, began to growl in disapproval. Cyprian the Lycan stepped toward the bench. Unlike wolves who rely on instinct, he possessed a memory that retained every detail of Thalassa's secret meetings. I remember the scent of the synthetic bond in your lab, Thalassa, Cyprian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous frequency. I remember you saying that a Sigma's bite is difficult to heal, but their word is easy to bury. Thalassa reached for a hidden lever under the desk. If the law won't protect my school, then silver will. A trapdoor opened, and a mist of silver concentration began to fill the room. It was a weapon designed to weaken and subdue any wolf's strength. The alphas in the room slumped, their wolves howling in mental agony as the silver hit their lungs. But Xanthe didn't fall. She walked through the silver mist, her genetic mutation protecting her from the metal that should have brought her to her knees. She reached the bench and grabbed Thalassa by his silk tie. "I can't remain in wolf form for long because of this mutation," Xanthe whispered, her eyes glowing with a primal gold. "But I only need 1 minute to show you what a mother is capable of." She didn't use a knife or a gun. She used the heavy, silver-plated gavel of the High Council. With one strike she shattered the mahogany bench. "By the light of the moon goddess," Xanthe declared, "I reject your rejection." "The law didn't fail you, Thalassa. You failed the law," Xanthe said, her voice a low growl that vibrated in her chest as she stood over the shattered remains of the council bench. The silver mist continued to swirl through the courtroom, making the high-ranking alphas and their betas, usually the second-in-command and the alpha's right-hand men, slump in their seats. They were weakened by the metallic concentration, their wolves howling in a mental agony that only those of the blood could hear. But Xanthe, bolstered by a rare genetic mutation that made her immune to silver, remained the only one standing. "We're going to the ridge," Xanthe commanded, looking at Phoebe and the group of Sigmas. Phoebe, despite her rank being known as small and weak, stood tall. She no longer looked like the submissive wolf who would hide for hours in small spaces. She had the hypnotic power of her voice and a vial of the truth. Together they led the rogues, those cast out of their packs who were once unprotected by law, toward the dark law school. When they arrived at the northern ridge, the obsidian bar stood like a jagged tooth against the skyline. Thalassa had already retreated there, hiding behind his submissive Zeta and Theta guards. He had locked the gates, thinking his legal fortress was impenetrable. "You can't enter without a warrant," Thalassa shouted from the battlements, his voice amplified by the school's sound system. "I am the warrant," Xanthe roared. She led the charge. Because she was a Gamma, she was part of the pack's uppermost level of dominance, and her wolf was a natural hunter. She bypassed the silver-laced fencing, her mutation allowing her to tear through the metal with her bare hands. Behind her, the Sigmas used their hypnotic pheromones to daze the Zeta guards, causing them to drop their weapons in a state of confused submission. Inside the school's basement, they found the Sigma wing. It was filled with girls being trafficked, used for their pheromones to help Thalassa influence rich werewolf families and judges. The sight made Xanthe's blood boil. "Release them all," Xanthe ordered the rogues. She found Thalassa in the central library, frantically burning paper files. He looked up, his eyes wild. He tried to shift, but because he was a lawyer who relied on intellect rather than the warrior training most alphas gather for daily, his wolf was sluggish and unrefined. "You'll be a rogue forever, Xanthe," Thalassa hissed. "The High Council will never accept a woman who broke the laws of property." "The High Council is waking up," a voice boomed from the doorway. It was Cyprian. The Lycan walked into the room, his emotional projection making Thalassa's knees buckle with a sudden, overwhelming sense of shame. Cyprian held a stack of original deeds he had salvaged from the fire. "A Lycan retains human memories even in wolf form, Thalassa," Cyprian said. "I remember every word of the fraudulent vows you made. I remember the scent of the synthetic bond." Cyprian turned to Xanthe. "The school is yours. The land is yours. And by the law of the moon goddess, your child's bloodline inheritance is secure." Thalassa fell to the floor, his silk suit stained with ash. He was stripped of his title, his land, and his pride. He was now what he feared most. A man without a pack, a rogue who would be hunted by the very laws he had twisted. Xanthe looked out the window at the rising sun. She could feel her baby kicking, her chakra energy finally beginning to settle as the father's deceit was purged. "What do we do with him?" Phoebe asked, looking at the fallen alpha. Xanthe didn't look back. "Handcuff him with silver. Let him see how the law feels from the other side. The gavel may have shattered, but the law is finally breathing," Xanthe said as she looked out over the assembly of wolves gathered in the courtyard of the former obsidian bar. The silver-lace fencing had been torn down and replaced with rowan wood and ivy. Xanthe stood on the dais, her hand resting on her stomach where her child, a future alpha by bloodline inheritance, moved with a steady rhythm. Beside her stood Phoebe, now the head of the New Dawn education program for young Sigmas, and Cyprian, who remained to ensure the transition of power was respected by the High Council. Under the old law, a wolf's worth was measured only by their rank or the ink on a contract. Xanthe declared, her voice carrying across the ridge. But the moon goddess did not create us to be slaves to a hierarchy of greed. She looked toward the cells where Thalassa was now held. He had been stripped of his status and was now a rogue, living without the protection of any law, the very fate he had imposed on countless others. He was bound with silver cuffs, the metal keeping his manipulative wolf silent and weak. From this day forward, Xanthe continued, the Northern Ridge will not be a place of dark schemes. It will be a sanctuary for those the hierarchy has failed. We will continue our martial arts and military training, as is our tradition, but we will also teach every wolf to read the fine print of their own lives. Xanthe signaled to the betas, her new loyal right-hand men. They brought forward the original pact deeds. In a public display of reform, Xanthe had the documents amended to include matrimonial equality, ensuring that no alpha could ever again use a fake mate bond to seize a Luna's property. Phoebe stepped forward, her head held high. She was no longer the skittish Sigma who hid in small spaces. We have established the first Sigma Academy, she announced. Here, our sisters will learn to master their hypnotic voices for diplomacy and peace, not for deception. The crowd roared in approval. Even the elderly Zetas and Epsilons, who had been used as submissive labor by Thalassa, felt a new surge of purpose in their roles as educators and scouts for the pack. Cyprian stepped toward Xanthe, his Lycan aura projecting a sense of profound peace and justice that settled over the valley. The air is clear now, Luna Xanthe. The shadows of the obsidian bar have been purged by the light of the moon. Xanthe looked up at the full moon, feeling the strength of her wolf and the safety of her new pack. She had started as a gamma destined to lose everything, but she had ended as the woman who rewrote the destiny of her kind. The era of the predatory alpha is over, Xanthe whispered, her eyes glowing with a soft lunar light. Let the record show that the North has never been stronger.